He's the face of rebellion, the sneering, snarling architect of anarchy who spat on stages, cursed at crowds, and became the living symbol of a cultural uprising that terrified parents and electrified a generation. For nearly 5 decades, the world has known him as Johnny Rotten. He was the confrontational frontman of the Sex Pistols, the man who famously screamed "No future" and seemed dedicated to tearing down the entire music establishment. The story we all know is simple and legendary. Punk rock arrived like a lightning bolt to destroy everything that came before it. But what if that isn't the whole story? What if the snarling king of punk, the icon of opposition, was harboring a secret? What if the revolutionary fury of the Sex Pistols and the groundbreaking sound of Public Image Limited were fueled by a hidden collection of artists-musicians so complex, so theatrical, and so far outside the accepted punk rulebook that they would shatter everything you thought you knew about him? Well, that secret is coming out. While John Lydon hasn't sat down at 69 to issue an official ranked list, he's dropped clues and named names for decades, and by piecing them together, we can finally pull back the curtain. We're revealing 6 musicians who secretly shaped his sound and provided the true soundtrack to his rebellion. These aren't the artists you'll find on a typical punk playlist. They are the experimentalists, the avant-garde poets, and yes, even the progressive rock titans who, in their own way, taught Johnny Rotten how to be Johnny Rotten. First up on our list is a name that, for many, will seem like a total paradox. An artist known not for raw power, but for poetic nuance. Not for aggression, but for acrobatic vocal beauty. That artist is Tim Buckley. To understand why the king of punk cherishes the work of a 1960s folk jazz experimentalist, you have to get to the core of what John Lydon has always valued above all else: fearless, unapologetic originality. He wasn't looking for artists who fit into a neat box. He was looking for those who built their own. Tim Buckley was the definition of an artist who refused to be categorized. He started out as a fairly accessible folk rocker, but with each album, he ventured further into the unknown, shedding commercial expectations like a snake sheds its skin. He dove headfirst into jazz, soul, funk, and avant-garde soundscapes. But the true source of Lydon's admiration was Buckley's voice. Lydon has repeatedly said he views Buckley's voice as an instrument, in its own right a tool of immense power and unpredictable range. Buckley could move from a tender whisper to a gut-wrenching howl in a single line, using his vocals not just to sing, but to convey a primal, raw feeling. This fascination with vocal expression is the key to unlocking the Lydon enigma. For him, singing was never about hitting the right notes. It was about authenticity. When you hear that elongated, sneering, and almost pained delivery on Sex Pistols classics like Anarchy in the UK, you're not hearing a technically perfect singer. You're hearing a man using his voice as a weapon, a conduit for pure rage and frustration. The influence of Buckley isn't in the sound, but in the philosophy. Buckley showed a young Lydon that a voice could be more than just a melody delivery system. It could be a landscape of pure emotion. In Buckley's wildest work, like the 1970 album Star Sailor, he deconstructs song structures entirely. This is the spirit Lydon would carry forward, not into the 3-minute punk anthems of the Sex Pistols, but into the sprawling, challenging world of Public Image Limited. The wailing, tormented vocal performances on Pill tracks have the DNA of Buckley's fearless explorations all over them. Lydon admired Buckley not because he wanted to sound like him, but because Buckley's career was a testament to artistic courage. For a man who was about to blow up the music world and then walk away from its biggest band, Tim Buckley wasn't just an influence. He was a roadmap. Next, we encounter another figure who seems like the complete opposite of punk's fiery explosion. Nico, the German-born singer and model, famous for her brief, haunting time with the Velvet Underground, had a voice that was anything but rock and roll. It was a deep, chilling, almost funereal drone, delivered with a thick German accent that made her sound like a disaffected goddess contemplating the end of the world. While Lydon has said he was never a huge fan of the Velvet Underground, he was completely captivated by Nico's unique, unearthly presence. His admiration is centered on her solo work, especially the 1970 album Deserture. This album is stark, bleak, and deeply unsettling. The main instrument is a harmonium, a pump organ that makes the entire record sound like a dirge from a haunted church. There are no catchy choruses, no upbeat rhythms, no attempt to please anyone. It is pure, undiluted atmosphere and artistic statement so severe it exists in its own universe. And for John Lydon, that was the whole point. What Lydon heard in Nico's voice wasn't technical skill, but absolute, unwavering individuality. In an industry that demanded conformity, Nico was an immovable object. She made no attempt to soften her accent or adopt a conventional singing style. Her art was a take-it-or-leave-it deal, and that uncompromising stance was, in its own way, profoundly punk. It was a declaration that her identity and her vision were not up for negotiation. The connection between Nico's icy drone and Johnny Rotten's snarling delivery might not be obvious sonically, but it's profound philosophically. Both singers rejected pretty singing in favor of character. Nico's voice conveyed a sense of world-weary alienation. Lydon's conveyed social disgust and barely contained fury. Both used their voices to channel the anxieties of their environments. In championing Nico, Lydon reveals a key part of his taste. He's drawn to strength, not volume. Nico's power wasn't in her ability to scream, but in her refusal to bend. She was a silent, immovable force of artistic will, and Lydon, the loudest man in music, recognized her as a kindred spirit. If there is one artist on this list who truly embodies the spirit of ripping up the rulebook, it's Don Van Vliet, the visionary and eccentric genius known as Captain Beefheart. Lydon's admiration for Beefheart is maybe the most direct and audible of all his influences. It reveals the secret desire for sonic chaos that lay just beneath the surface of the Sex Pistols' three-chord attack. For Lydon, Captain Beefheart wasn't just making music. He was waging war on the very idea of what music was supposed to be. The cornerstone of this admiration is Beefheart's 1969 masterpiece, Trout Mask Replica. This is not an album you just put on in the background. It's a dense, chaotic, and often brutal listen. The result is a work of staggering originality, a collision of free jazz, Delta blues, and surrealist poetry that sounds like it was beamed from another planet. The rhythms constantly shift, the guitars are angular and dissonant, and over it all, Beefheart growls and bellows his bizarre poetry. For a young John Lydon, hearing Trout Mask Replica was a moment of pure validation. He famously said of the album, "It was anti-music in the most interesting and insane way. All the bum notes I was being told off for by the teachers were finally being released by well-known artists." That was my confirmation. That quote is the Rosetta Stone for understanding Lydon's entire career. He wasn't interested in mastering the language of rock and roll. He wanted to prove that language was a prison. Beefheart gave him permission to be wrong. While the Sex Pistols were a more conventional rock band, Beefheart's chaos is still there. But the true heir to Captain Beefheart's influence is Public Image Ltd. After the Sex Pistols imploded, Lydon was finally free to chase his experimental urges. Kyle's debut album, First Issue, and especially its follow-up, Metal Box, are drenched in the spirit of Trout Mask Replica. Tracks like Theme dispense with traditional song structure entirely, focusing instead on texture, groove, and a raw, unsettling atmosphere. This is the direct legacy of Captain Beefheart. Lydon loved Beefheart because he understood that true rebellion wasn't just about shouting slogans. It was about fundamentally rewiring how people hear the world. Now, we journey to post-war Germany and into the experimental heart of the movement known as Krautrock. The band is Can, and their influence on John Lydon is the critical bridge between the raw energy of punk and the sophisticated, rhythm-driven world of post-punk. If Captain Beefheart gave Lydon the blueprint for tearing things down, Can gave him the blueprint for building something new. Formed in Cologne in 1968, Can fused the hypnotic, locked-in rhythms of funk and jazz with the experimental textures of psychedelic rock. They were less interested in songs than in creating immersive sonic worlds. At the heart of their sound was the legendary rhythm section of Jackie Lebezid on drums and Holger Chouquet on bass. Together they created a powerful, hypnotic engine that could drive a track for 20 minutes. Lydon's gateway to Can was their massive 1971 album, Fego Mago. He has cited the sprawling 18-minute track Hallelujah as a piece of music that completely changed his perspective. It builds from a simple, infectious groove and slowly accumulates layers of sound-jagged guitar stabs, found sounds, and the unhinged vocals of singer Damo Suzuki. It's a masterpiece of tension and release. Lydon heard this and had a revelation. In the aftermath of the Sex Pistols, he was desperate to escape the limits of the punk rock format. In Can, he heard a new model for a band, one where the bass and drums were the lead instruments. This philosophy became the absolute cornerstone of Pill. The sound of early Public Image Ltd., particularly on the album Metal Box, is a direct tribute to Can's innovations. The emphasis shifted from guitar-centric rock to jaw wobble's deep, dub-inspired bass lines. This was the lesson of Tego Mago asterisk. The story goes that his admiration ran so deep, he even tried to join Can after they had broken up, phoning their office and insisting he'd be the perfect new singer. They had to gently convince him the band no longer existed. His obsession shows just how much their ethos resonated with him. Can was experimental without being pretentious, and for Lydon, they provided the perfect escape from rock and roll cliches. They showed him a new future, one built on the infinite power of the groove. This next artist shatters the central myth of punk rock, the idea that it was a year zero event that rejected all the long-haired hippie rock that came before it. The band is Hawkwind, the godfathers of space rock, and John Lydon's love for them reveals a hidden history between the two supposedly warring tribes of British music. In fact, long before he was Johnny Rotten, Lydon was a devoted fan, a long-hair himself, who used to follow Hawkwind around to their gigs. Hawkwind's music was a swirling, psychedelic vortex of heavy guitar riffs and bleeping synthesizers, with lyrics about space travel and social collapse. They were the ultimate countercultural band, a chaotic collective of freaks and outsiders. And the young Lydon was right there in the audience. His connection to the band is deeply personal and centered on one iconic figure, their legendary bassist, Lemmy Kilmister. Before he founded Motorhead, Lemmy was the thunderous engine of Hawkwind. Lydon admired him immensely, not just for his music, but for his character. He saw him as a figure of pure authenticity. Lemmy's own memory of meeting Lydon in 1977 is telling. He recalled a bush behind him at a bar saying, "I used to sell acid at all-night shows, ... Lemmy turned around and it was Johnny Rotten, who he remembered as a kid with long hair from the Hawkwind days. That story isn't just a colorful anecdote, it's a crucial piece of punk history. It shows the divide between the hippie and punk scenes was far more blurry than the music press let on. Lydon praised Lemmy as one of the very first long hairs to show up at early punk gigs, someone who wasn't afraid to cross tribal lines. Both Hawkwind and the Sex Pistols, in their own ways, were providing a soundtrack for outsiders. The influence of Hawkwind on Lydon is more about energy and attitude than sound. It's the raw, monolithic power, a quality that Lydon definitely